Soraya Whitaker had spent years playing the role of the devoted wife, standing beside her husband, Tavian, a man who commanded respect and demanded obedience. To the outside world, they had it all: wealth, power, and a life most people envied. But behind the doors of their lavish Cincinnati home, Soraya was little more than a prisoner, suffocating under Tavian's iron grip. He controlled everything: her money, her choices, even her freedom. And the longer she lived under his rule, the more she dreamed of escape. What makes a person cross the line from longing to homicide? How does a wife go from victim to killer? And what happens when the one seeking justice is closer than anyone expected? Before we dive into this chilling case, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more shocking stories of love, lies, and lethal betrayals. Because this one will leave you speechless. Tavian Whitaker was a man who had built his empire from the ground up. Born into poverty on the west side of Cincinnati, he clawed his way out of struggle with sheer determination and an unrelenting hunger for success. By the time he was 30, he was already one of the city's most successful real estate moguls, flipping properties and turning run-down neighborhoods into high-end developments. People respected him. Feared him, even. He wasn't the kind of man you crossed. His sharp mind and ruthless business tactics had crushed competitors who made the mistake of underestimating him. His home life wasn't much different. Tavian ran his household like he ran his business. Everything had a structure, and everything had to go his way. He married Soraya when she was just 24, nearly 15 years his junior, a stunning woman who had once dreamed of becoming an artist but instead found herself trapped in the role of Tavian's perfect wife. To outsiders, they were a power couple, the beautiful, graceful wife and the powerful, wealthy husband who provided her with a life of luxury. Their gated mansion, designer wardrobes, and extravagant vacations painted a picture of a woman who had it all. But behind closed doors, Soraya felt like little more than one of Tavian's prized possessions, something to be displayed, controlled, and discarded if she ever stepped out of line. Every dollar she spent was tracked. Every outing she took required his approval. His love, if it could even be called that, was conditional. When she pleased him, she was showered with expensive gifts. When she disappointed him, she was met with cold, calculating silence or worse, reminders of just how replaceable she was. For years, Soraya played her role, convincing herself that this was just the price of security. But the loneliness ate away at her, piece by piece, until she could barely recognize the woman she once was. She longed for something real, something passionate, something that made her feel alive. That's when she found Pastor Jarrell McAllister. McAllister was the kind of man who could command an entire room with just his voice. His sermons weren't just words, they were experiences, powerful enough to make grown men weep and women fall to their knees in prayer. At 38, he was younger than Tavian but carried himself with the same air of authority, though his power came from the pulpit rather than the business world. He was beloved in the community, a spiritual leader who spoke about faith, redemption, and the importance of family. But behind the pulpit, McAllister was a man of dangerous appetites. His reputation as a devoted man of God was carefully curated, hiding the truth that he had spent years indulging in sins he condemned every Sunday morning. He had a way with women: his charm, his voice, the way he made them feel seen. He was a master of seduction, knowing exactly what to say and how to say it to make women believe they were special. When Soraya came to him, it wasn't about lust, not at first. She had gone to him for counseling, desperate for guidance, for someone to hear her, to understand her. She spoke about her loneliness, about the weight of being Tavian's wife, about how she felt like a bird in a gilded cage. And McAllister listened. He comforted her, offered her scripture, told her she was more than just a man's possession. And then, one evening, he kissed her. It was slow, deliberate, and nothing like the cold, calculated kisses she had received from Tavian. It was the kind of kiss that awakened something inside her, something she hadn't felt in years. She should have pulled away, should have reminded herself that this was wrong, that she was a married woman and he was a pastor. But she didn't. The affair started with stolen moments, late-night phone calls, hushed whispers in the church office, fingers grazing in passing. Then it became more. Secret meetings in hotel rooms. Passionate nights spent tangled in sheets, where Soraya could forget she was Tavian's wife and McAllister could forget he was a man of God. The deeper they fell into their affair, the more dangerous it became. For Soraya, it was about escape. For McAllister, it was about power. He had control over her in a way that Tavian never did, and he thrived on it. But there was one undeniable truth they couldn't ignore: Tavian Whitaker was not a man who shared. And if he ever found out, he wouldn't forgive. And that's when the whispers of murder began. Soraya had never considered herself a killer. But love, or at least, what she thought was love, had a way of changing a person. What started as whispers between tangled sheets soon became full-fledged conversations, the kind of talk that sent shivers down her spine, not just from fear but from excitement. The thought of a future without Tavian, a life where she wasn't controlled, where she could breathe again, was intoxicating. But reality was much colder. Divorce isn't an option, McAllister had told her one evening, his voice low, serious. They were lying in bed, the dim glow of the hotel lamp casting long shadows across his face. "You leave that man, and he'll make sure you don't have a damn thing to your name. No money, no home, no life." Soraya knew he was right. Tavian was the type of man who saw a divorce as a declaration of war, and he never lost wars. He would drag her through hell just to prove a point. And McAllister? He had other reasons for wanting Tavian gone. For years, Tavian had been one of the church's biggest donors, writing checks that kept the lights on, the renovations flowing, and McAllister's pockets lined. But a man like Tavian didn't give out of the kindness of his heart. He gave to keep people indebted to him, to ensure that the church, and more importantly, its pastor, would always be on his side. If Tavian ever found out the truth about the affair, the consequences would be devastating. Not just for Soraya, but for McAllister. Tavian wouldn't just cut off his donations, he'd expose the pastor for everything he was. A fraud. A hypocrite. A man of God who preached about righteousness while sleeping with another man's wife. His reputation, his ministry, everything he had built, it would all crumble. "We do this," McAllister said, his fingers tracing lazy circles on Soraya's bare skin, "and we do it right. No mistakes." She swallowed, her throat dry. "How?" McAllister's lips curled into something that might have been a smile if it weren't so devoid of warmth. "Tavian's a man of habit. We use that against him." Soraya knew her husband's routine better than anyone. Every night, Tavian walked through the door at exactly 9 p.m. By 9:05, he had a glass of whiskey in his hand, a ritual that never changed. "You'll spike his drink," McAllister continued. "Something strong enough to take him down but not enough to kill him. And then I finish it." Soraya should have felt something in that moment: doubt, fear, guilt. Instead, she felt nothing but the slow, creeping acceptance of a decision she had already made. The night of the murder, Soraya played her part flawlessly. She was waiting for Tavian when he walked through the door, dressed in the silk robe he liked, her smile warm, inviting. "Long day?" she asked, taking his coat. Tavian grunted in response, rubbing the tension from his temples. "Same as always." She poured his whiskey, her hands steady as she added the crushed muscle relaxant. Not too much, just enough to make him weak, slow, helpless. Tavian took the glass without a second thought, downing half of it in a single swallow. Soraya watched. 5 minutes. His fingers twitched against the rim of the glass. His brows furrowed. 10 minutes. He stood, or at least tried to, but his legs buckled beneath him. The glass slipped from his grip, shattering against the hardwood floor. His breath came in short, ragged gasps as he looked at her, confusion giving way to realization. "You." Before he could finish, the front door creaked open. McAllister stepped inside, moving with the slow, deliberate steps of a man who was exactly where he was meant to be. Dressed in black from head to toe, he looked more like an executioner than a pastor. Tavian struggled, his body fighting against the betrayal of his own muscles. His eyes darted between them, wide with fury, with fear. He knew. He knew. McAllister crouched beside him, resting a hand against Tavian's chest as if in mock comfort. "The Lord giveth," he murmured, his voice a whisper in the dying man's ear, "and the Lord taketh away." Then his hands wrapped around Tavian's throat. Soraya didn't move. She didn't look away. She just stood there, her pulse hammering as McAllister squeezed. Tavian fought, even as his body failed him. His hands grasped weakly at McAllister's wrists, his feet dragging uselessly against the floor. His face darkened, veins bulging in his forehead. Soraya expected it to take seconds. It didn't. It took minutes. By the time Tavian went still, McAllister was breathing hard, his grip loosening as he let the lifeless body slump to the floor. He sat back on his heels, wiping his hands on his pants before looking up at Soraya. "Now," he said, voice steady. "We burn him." Soraya never realized how heavy a human body was until she and McAllister tried to move Tavian's lifeless form. His muscles, once taut with power and authority, were now dead weight. The man who had once loomed over her, dictating her every move, now lay at her feet, helpless. The irony should have made her feel something. Instead, she felt nothing but urgency. McAllister wasted no time. "Help me get him into the Escalade," he ordered, his voice calm, clinical. He had planned for this. Soraya swallowed hard and nodded. Together, they lifted Tavian's body, struggling under his weight. The effort was grueling, but the fear of getting caught made them push past exhaustion. They dragged him through the house, leaving faint streaks of blood on the hardwood floor. Soraya shuddered, but McAllister didn't even glance down at the mess. He was focused, determined. By the time they reached the garage, Soraya's arms burned, her breath came in ragged gasps. McAllister opened the back of Tavian's Cadillac Escalade, and they hoisted the body inside, folding him awkwardly into the cargo space like discarded luggage. McAllister shut the door with a final thud and turned to her. "Go inside. Clean up." "What about you?" she asked, breathless. "I'm taking care of this," he said, already climbing into the driver's seat. "Be ready when I get back." And just like that, he was gone. The road stretched before him, dark and empty. McAllister kept his hand steady on the wheel, glancing in the rearview mirror at the lifeless body behind him. It wasn't the first time he had driven down this isolated path. He had prepared for this moment. Days ago, he had spent hours digging a grave deep in the woods, his hands blistering against the shovel. Now, all that effort was about to pay off. He turned off the main road, following the unmarked dirt path into the dense forest. The headlights barely cut through the darkness, casting eerie shadows through the trees. He drove until he reached the clearing he had chosen, the shallow grave waiting just a few feet away. McAllister killed the engine, sat for a moment in silence. Then, he stepped out, inhaling the crisp night air. He moved to the back of the Escalade, yanked open the trunk, and stared down at Tavian's lifeless body. This was it. No turning back. He reached inside, grabbed Tavian by the arms, and dragged him out of the vehicle. The body hit the ground with a dull thud. McAllister wasted no time. He grunted as he pulled the corpse toward the grave, the strain making his muscles ache. Then, just before rolling Tavian into the pit, he did something that wasn't part of the plan. He pulled out his phone. Soraya had trusted him completely, but McAllister knew better than to trust her. He had seen it too many times, people getting sloppy, getting scared, turning on each other when things went south. That wasn't going to happen to him. He crouched beside the body, angling the camera just right. The flash illuminated Tavian's lifeless face, his eyes half open, lips parted in a final, frozen gasp. McAllister took several pictures, his face, his body, the bruises around his neck, the grave waiting to swallow him whole. Satisfied, he slipped the phone back into his pocket. Insurance. Just in case. With a grunt, he pushed Tavian's body into the pit. The sound of dead weight hitting dirt echoed through the stillness of the night. McAllister grabbed a canister of gasoline he had stashed nearby, pouring it over the body until the sharp scent burned his nostrils. Then he struck a match. The flames erupted in an instant, licking hungrily at Tavian's body. The fire crackled, sending black smoke curling into the sky. McAllister stood there, watching as the flames consumed what was left of the man who had once controlled everything. By the time the fire died down, only charred remains were left. McAllister grabbed the shovel, shoving dirt over the ashes until nothing remained but disturbed earth. It was done. Soraya sat on the edge of the bed, her foot tapping anxiously against the floor. The house smelled of bleach, her hands raw from scrubbing every last trace of Tavian's presence. She had erased him from their home, just as they had erased him from existence. When she heard the front door creak open, she jumped. McAllister walked in, his clothes smelling of smoke. His expression was unreadable. "It's done," he said simply. Relief washed over her, but before she could say anything, McAllister pulled out his phone, holding it up so she could see. Her breath caught in her throat. On the screen was Tavian's lifeless face, the bruises on his throat stark against his dark skin. She looked up at McAllister in shock. Why did you take those?" McAllister smirked, slipping the phone back into his pocket. "Securing our future." Her stomach twisted. "I thought we trusted each other." "We do," he said smoothly. "But trust and leverage aren't the same thing, Soraya." A chill ran down her spine. She had gotten rid of one man who controlled her life, only to replace him with another. The next morning, Soraya played her role to perfection. She woke up early, dressed in one of Tavian's favorite dresses, and called his office first. "Good morning, this is Soraya Whitaker. Has my husband made it in yet?" The secretary sounded confused. "No, ma'am. He hasn't called in either." Soraya let the silence stretch. Then, just the right amount of hesitation in her voice, she murmured, "That's strange." She ended the call and dialed Tavian's brother next. "Hey, it's Soraya. Have you heard from Tavian?" "Nah, why?" "He didn't come home last night." Her voice wavered just enough. "I thought maybe he stayed with you." A pause. Then, concern creeping in, "That's not like him." Exactly the reaction she wanted. Finally, she made the last call. The most important one. 911, what's your emergency? "Hi, I'd like to report a missing person. My husband, he never came home last night." The words tasted bitter on her tongue, but she forced herself to keep going. "I'm really worried. This isn't like him." The officer on the line took down the details, assuring her that they would begin an investigation. Soraya feigned gratitude, thanked them, and ended the call. When she turned, McAllister was watching her from the kitchen doorway, arms crossed. "Good girl," he murmured. Soraya swallowed the lump in her throat. She had done everything right. Laid the groundwork for the perfect disappearance. But as she met McAllister's calculating gaze, she realized something. The real danger hadn't died with Tavian. It was standing right in front of her. Soraya sat in front of the vanity mirror, staring at her reflection, but all she saw was a woman unraveling. The night of Tavian's murder had played over and over in her mind, a loop that wouldn't stop. The scent of bleach still lingered in the house, but no amount of scrubbing could erase what they had done. The phone buzzed, shattering the silence. She frowned. It was a blocked number. Her fingers hesitated before answering, but instead of a call, a message popped up. A single image. Her stomach twisted as she clicked on it. The photo loaded slowly, pixel by pixel, and then, her breath hitched. Tavian's burned, unrecognizable body lay in a bed of scorched earth. The charred remains. The evidence that was supposed to be buried forever. Her blood turned to ice. Another message followed. I know what you did. Soraya's hands trembled as she covered her mouth. She felt like she couldn't breathe. Her mind raced. Who? Who could have possibly known? McAllister had been careful. They had been careful. The body was destroyed, the grave covered. No one was there that night. Unless. She spun around, sprinting to the living room where McAllister sat on the couch, casually scrolling through his phone. Something's wrong, she blurted, shoving the phone into his hands. McAllister's relaxed expression vanished the second his eyes landed on the screen. His jaw clenched. He scrolled, reading the next message that had just arrived. $50,000. Old railway station. Midnight. Or everyone finds out. Soraya's breath was shallow, panic clawing at her chest. Who the hell is this? McAllister was silent, his mind clearly racing. His grip on the phone tightened. No clue. Well, someone knows. She hissed. And they have proof. He exhaled sharply, tapping his fingers against the armrest. It could be someone bluffing. Her eyes flashed with desperation. Bluffing? McAllister, they sent a picture of his damn body. A tense silence stretched between them. McAllister stood up, pacing. He ran a hand over his beard, his expression unreadable. We can't ignore this. If they go to the cops, it's over. Soraya felt sick. Do we pay them? McAllister's face darkened. We don't have a choice. The night air was thick with humidity, the kind that made it hard to breathe. Soraya gripped the duffel bag tightly, her knuckles turning white. Inside, $50,000 in cash, everything they could scrape together in such a short time. The old railway station was exactly as she remembered, abandoned, lifeless, the rusted tracks leading nowhere. Stay close, McAllister murmured as they stepped onto the platform. His body was tense, ready for anything. Their eyes scanned the darkness. No movement. No footsteps. Just eerie silence. Something felt wrong. Where are they? Soraya whispered. McAllister pulled out his phone, scrolling to the mysterious number. He hesitated, then typed, "We're here." No response. Then, far in the distance, a faint sound. Not footsteps. Not rustling. Sirens. Soraya's breath caught in her throat. Oh my God, she whispered. The red and blue lights appeared like ghosts through the fog, growing brighter, closer, surrounding them before they could even move. Shit, McAllister growled. Tires screeched as cop cars flooded the area, cutting off any escape. Officers emerged, guns drawn. The deafening sound of orders being shouted hands up. Get down on the ground. Rang in Soraya's ears. McAllister's expression turned from shock to rage. It was a setup, he hissed. Soraya barely heard him over the pounding in her chest. The last thing she saw before she hit the ground, hands behind her head, was a figure standing behind the police line. Watching. Whoever had blackmailed them had never wanted the money. They had wanted justice. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back wall, their cameras flashing like lightning. The jury had been out for less than 6 hours, and now the moment had come. The entire city of Cincinnati was watching, waiting. Soraya sat stiffly in her seat, her face pale, lips pressed into a thin line. McAllister, shackled beside her, stared ahead, expression unreadable. They had spent months trapped in a legal battle that had played out like a twisted soap opera, headlines dissecting every lie, every affair, every detail of Tavian Whitaker's gruesome murder. The judge adjusted his glasses. The silence was suffocating. The jury has reached a verdict. Soraya's fingers dug into her lap, her breathing shallow. The foreperson, a middle-aged woman with streaks of gray in her hair, stood with a sheet of paper in hand. In the case of Soraya Whitaker, we find the defendant guilty of first-degree murder. Soraya inhaled sharply. Her body tensed as if she had been struck. In the case of Jarrell McAllister, we find the defendant guilty of first-degree murder. The judge cleared his throat. Soraya Whitaker, you are hereby sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. A muffled gasp rippled through the courtroom. And Jarrell McAllister. The judge looked over the rim of his glasses. You are sentenced to death. The air in the courtroom turned electric. A murmur spread through the crowd, some shocked, some satisfied. Then, movement. Soraya turned her head. McAllister followed. And there, standing at the back of the courtroom, was Karen Whitaker. Tavian's younger brother. The man who had set them up. Karen's face was unreadable, his sharp features still, his dark eyes locked onto them like a hunter who had just taken down his prey. Soraya felt her stomach churn. It was him. McAllister's lips parted slightly. For the first time since his arrest, his composure cracked. His nostrils flared, his eyes darkened. He had spent months wondering who had betrayed them, who had known. And it had been Karen. The younger brother who had always stood in Tavian's shadow. The one no one had paid attention to. McAllister's fists clenched. You, he murmured under his breath. Karen smirked. Just barely. Then he turned and walked out. Justice had been served. The media went wild. News anchors dissected every detail of the case. The hypocrisy of a pastor who had preached about faithfulness while committing adultery and murder. The downfall of a woman who had once been the wife of a powerful real estate mogul. But the loudest voices came from the church. Some still defended McAllister. They refused to believe their beloved pastor was a murderer. He was set up by the devil, one churchgoer said in an interview. That man saved lives. The devil is busy. Others had turned on him completely. He fooled us all, a woman snapped outside the courthouse. And he did it in the name of God. Hell is too good for him. Soraya, once the polished, put-together wife of Tavian Whitaker, was now nothing more than an inmate. Prison orange replaced designer heels. Cameras no longer adored her, they condemned her. McAllister sat in a death row cell, the Bible that once made him powerful now just another book on a cold metal shelf. He had spent years preaching about divine justice. And now, justice had found him. One last statement came from an unlikely source. Tavian and Karen's mother had remained silent throughout the trial, never once showing up in court, never speaking to reporters. But the night before McAllister's sentencing, a journalist caught her outside her home. They asked if she had anything to say about the fate of the two people responsible for her son's murder. She looked at the camera, her expression unreadable. And then, with a voice heavy with pain, she simply said, God don't like ugly. Some crimes are driven by desperation. Others by passion. But the murder of Tavian Whitaker was fueled by something far more sinister, greed, arrogance, and the belief that they could get away with it. Soraya and Pastor McAllister thought they had planned the perfect crime. No witnesses, no evidence, and a well-crafted lie to cover their tracks. But fate has a way of turning on the guilty. One wrong move, one loose end, and their entire world crumbled around them. Could they have walked free if not for the blackmail? Maybe. But justice has a way of finding those who think they are untouchable. What do you think? Would they have gotten away with it if they hadn't been set up? And does this case prove that justice always wins in the end? If this case sent chills down your spine, hit like and subscribe for more tales of love, lies, and cold-blooded murder.